calculus, trigonometry, engineering, genetics, geometry, geophysics, meteorology, physics, taxonomy, zoology. I mean, the word algebra comes from jabr. Chemistry literally comes from alchemia, alchemy. And we find that Muslims made great contributions in medicine, in math. When we count, we are counting with the Arabic numeral system. 0 is literally an Arabic word, sifr. So when we count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, we are counting with an Islamic number system. And so Muslims were able to make that contact. But we have to recognize historically, and it's always important to look at history not only just for facts and information, but try to understand what happened to the people. How did they use their technology? What are the lessons that we can learn from the people during that time? We recognize the fact that Muslims had reached the heights of civilization. But when they left the tenets of Islam, when the Arabs were distinguished from the non-Arabs, when the white was distinguished from the black, when the rich began to oppress the poor, when people began to be involved in the drinking of wine, and they were involved in corruptions, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took away their knowledge and supremacy. And we find that they were humiliated. And history records the Inquisition. This is one of the most terrible persecutions in the history of this planet. It is in this time that Muslims were taken to the Inquisitor. And the Inquisitor would say very clearly, are you a Catholic? If you were not, if you were Jewish or Muslim, and you recognized your faith, you would be burnt at the stake. If you said you were a Catholic, then they would allow you to live. And so what happened was that literally hundreds and thousands of Muslims and Jews were forced out of Andalusia, were forced to flee into North Africa and into the Americas. So the early population of people who were coming across with the Portuguese and the Spanish were for the most part Muslims. The artisans, the people working on the boats, it was Islam that had developed the technology to go across the ocean. And so when Vasco da Gama was crossing the Cape of Good Hope, he was helped by Ibn Majid. When Columbus came across, he had actually gone to West Africa on one of his early journeys. And so Muslims were literally on the boats. And Rodrigo de Triana, a Muslim who was hiding his identity, sighted land before Columbus. But Columbus took the credit for it. What we recognize is that the history of Islam was wiped out from that point. What we recognize is that those Jews who could not take the oppression and had to hide their identity were called Morenos, and the Muslims were called Morescos. These are people who outwardly are Catholic, but inside they are still within their own religion, and the Morescos were still within a state of Islam. One of the interesting studies which is coming forward today is a book written by N. Brent Kennedy called The Melungeons, The Resurrection of a Proud People. Within these writings, we are recognizing the fact that in early America, when the British came to the shores, they found not only native people, but they also found Spanish people, Portuguese, and Muslims who had come across as the artisans. And Brent Kennedy was struck with a debilitating disease, sarcoidosis, and this nerve-based disease is also found in the Mediterranean. And when he went to the doctors and studied his genetics, he found that his genes, the frequency of his genes and what was being found with his genetic makeup was similar to the genetic makeup of people in North Africa, in Sicily, all throughout the Mediterranean, and interestingly enough, also in Turkey. He also found out that this sarcoidosis could be found within people of that region. And so, along with the study of disease, he also recognized that there was a great tradition for his people. His people were known as Melungeons. Within America, in the South, people relate to natives, African Americans, Euro Americans, but we also recognize that the Southern people recognize a group of people called Portuguese or Portuguese, Geechis. And these people lived alongside the other famous groups. What is now coming to the surface is the fact that The Spanish established Santa Elena, South Carolina, in 1566. This is 40 years before Jamestown. And this was a thriving colony. And when the British came into that region and they conquered Santa Elena, the workers, the artisans, the Melungeons, fled into the mountains and they mixed with the native tribes all throughout that southern region. We also recognize the fact that right around the same time in 1586, the English pirate Sir Francis Drake was commanding 30 English ships. He made a daring raid against the Spanish and Portuguese colonies in Brazil, and he succeeded in liberating over 400 Portuguese and Spanish people who were held prisoner. History tells us that over 300 of these people were Melungeons or Morescos or Muslims who had been hiding their identities, or Turkish people who were used in the galley boats for the Portuguese and the Spanish. Francis Drake wanted to establish a colony in Cuba, but the winds would not allow him to land, so he went north and he landed on the coast of the Carolinas. There he led off the Melungeon people, took on British passengers, and these Melungeon people, history records, went inland and mixed with the Powhatan native people, with the Hatteras, with the Seminoles, with the people living in that southern area. History also records to us that in 1654, the English explorers learned from southeastern Indians of a colony of bearded people wearing European clothing, living in cabins and smelting silver and dropping to their knees 5 times a day. And these people were called Portuguese. Also, in the mid-1600s, there were people living amongst the Powhatans and the related tribes of Eastern Virginia and North Carolina who were described as dark like Indians, but they were called Portuguese. In 1784, Tennessee Governor John Sevier records an encounter in northwestern North Carolina with a dark-skinned, reddish, brown-complexioned people who were supposed to be, he thought, of Moorish descent, or Portuguese. In eastern Tennessee, late 1700s, Jonathan Swift, an Englishman, married to a Melungeon woman, utilized Melungeon people in his mines. He described them as dark-complexioned people, and they were known as Mecca Indians. We also recognize the fact that the Portuguese-based Melungeon or Moresco people, this different group, which is primarily Muslim, intermingled with the native people and the African-American people. And so today, with this study coming forward, which is now flowering, and this information is giving us another understanding of the United States, with this study, we recognize that anybody in the southeastern part of the United States, whether he be of European background, of African American background, of native background, if he has the following names, he could be one of the Melungeons. And I'll name a few of the names: Adams, Adkins, Bell, Bennett, Berry, Bowling, Chavis, Coleman, Collins, Gibson, Goins, Hall, Jackson, Lopez, Moore, Mullins, Nash, Robinson, Sexton, and Williams. History also records to us that the wife of Abraham Lincoln, President of the United States, Nancy Hanks, was a Melungeon. There are many famous people within history, even in recent times, and there's a phenomenon of Elvis Presley. Elvis Presley's mother was a Melungeon. That's that look that Elvis had. It's found all throughout the southeastern part of the United States. The next wave of Muslim migration to the West would be the slavery period. That is a period that could also be described as the time of the coming of captured prisoners of war, where people, African people, were taken from the Guinea coast of West Africa, from the Congo, from Angola, and they were carried to the Americas, to Brazil, to the Caribbean, to the United States. People from the Wolof, Ashanti, Yoruba, Susu, Fanti, Hausa, Fulani, all the different nations were put side by side and brought into the Americas. Recent historical documentation shows us that at least 30% of the African people brought into the Americas were Muslim. How can we come to this conclusion? Especially when history books have been written before and have not included Muslims. What is happening now is that there is a reanalysis going on, and that through the investigation and study of autobiographical and biographical sketches, through newspaper articles, through ads for runaway slaves, through slaveholders' records, through the testimonies of slaves and their descendants, and interesting even Arabic writings written by the slaves that are coming to the surface, we now understand that not only were Muslims